Kacey, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Thanks for having
Yes.
me.
Thank you for joining me. And I'm very excited about this episode because it's slightly different from what I usually do. And it's a topic that is very close to my heart, facilitation with psychedelics and plant medicine. Um, and yeah, cannot wait to learn from you. And we always start at the beginning.
Great.
When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
I do. Such a good question. I honestly, I didn't really think of myself as a facilitator until I started working in the psychedelic and plant medicine work.
Mm,
I worked as a coach for many years before that, and I had done coaching and training. And I think looking back, I was also facilitating, I was facilitating workshops and things, but I didn't really call it that. And then when I entered a facilitator training for the psychedelic work, it was a bit of a mindset shift.
mm.
So it's been about 5 years now.
Nice. And what was the mindset shift about?
There's one experience in particular from early in that training that really shifted it for me when I recognized that as a facilitator, I needed to have a much lighter touch.
Mm,
In coaching, I think I'm aware that there needs to be sometimes less of me in the space. I don't want to put my stories and my projections into the client's space. So I'm mindful of that. But in facilitation, especially in the psychedelic and plant work, it's I need to be even more present to that,
mm.
to really leaning back with my presence, with my questions, with any curiosity I have, and certainly with any sort of agenda that might come up, for me as a human. I think that's important in any facilitation setting, but in this work, it can be especially delicate. So I learned that early on, and that really shifted. Okay, coaching, when I'm in coaching mode, sometimes I'm really going in with somebody, I'm really challenging them
Mm.
in a way. And in the psychedelic space, I don't want to be so challenging. I'm not trying to kick in the front door of their perceptions and their belief systems. I'm wanting to move at a much slower, gentler pace.
Mm. Because there's more risk them going into a direction that might be more frightening than healing.
People are so sensitive and so open,
Yeah.
yeah, in that space.
And something that just came to my mind right now, and I hope that we'll touch upon that either now or at a later stage. It might be too early actually for that. Um, is that in the coaching space, or if we think of corporate workshops, talking workshops, is we hear and verbalize, or at least visualize, the process that the group goes through and the individuals. Whereas in the psychedelic and plant medicine work you do, most of it is very personal and not verbalized.
That's true. There's a lot of energetic work that can happen, and a lot when people are in a journey space. Sometimes the people that I am facilitating have an eye mask on and their eyes closed and they're quiet for hours.
Hmm.
And so I may be facilitating, but really I'm co-facilitating with the plants and the psychedelics.
Mm.
I always have that co-facilitator in the space. So that also shifts a lot about how I'm going to show up or when I'm going to lean in and lean back.
Yeah. And I think the aspect of psychological safety plays a very different role in the work you have to be up to do upfront to really set up everyone to what are the shared agreement, how do we show up, and what will happen to set expectations maybe as well.
Mhm. Yes, I always tell people safety is my top priority
Mm.
in the work. That comes first. And sometimes to the extent, of course, we will probably touch on this too later, but with safety being so important, sometimes there are people who want to come in for this sort of work who it's not going to be the right fit. And there may still be work we can do together, and I may still facilitate a process with them, but it may not include ingesting anything.
Mm, very interesting. And maybe we start or take a step back because I don't know whether everyone in the audience is familiar with what are psychedelics, what are plants, what the heck are they actually talking about?
Yes, every now and then, out in the world, I've talked to people, and when I say plant medicine, I think there's sometimes people assume I mean we're working with, I don't know, maybe different like herbs, like an herbalist,
Or
or that I'm
Ayurveda.
a naturopath or something like that. There are a lot of imaginings of what that means. But for me, I'm usually working more with some classic psychedelics. Noticing, wanting to be mindful of what how much I share about what I work with. Um,
And you don't have to.
yeah, let me think about what feels safe to say out loud about that.
Gordon, please cut that part out. Um,
Thanks.
you could refer to shamanic sacred plants.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, let's say often when we're talking about psychedelics and plant medicines in this context, we're talking about some of the classic psychedelics like MDMA, MDA, LSD, um, and also many sacred shamanic plants, including ayahuasca or wachuma, um, and more recently some medicines like ketamine. So there's a wide variety, and also sometimes plants that people might not think of as, no, I'm going to cut that part. I'm going to cut that part. We'll stop at ketamine. I'm going to be being mindful of my sources.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of, so thank you for clarifying that. And I'm aware that all these, depending on which country we're in, some of them are legal, some of them are illegal,
Right.
depending on the context.
I didn't mention psilocybin. That's one of the biggest ones that certainly that I work with, but I think that a lot of people are working with right now. So
Do you want
um,
to go
yeah,
back?
that feels important to mention. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's go.
Reverse. Okay. So when when I am talking about psychedelics and plant medicines, often I am referring to some of, I think what we think is some of the classics like psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, MDA, and also some sacred shamanic and indigenous plants like ayahuasca and wachuma. And then more recently, medicines like ketamine that are being used in the psychedelic therapeutic context as well.
Yeah, and then depending on the context, on the country, some of them are legal, some of them are illegal, and some of them are only legal in the therapeutic
Correct.
work and accompanied work. And I think that's maybe important here as a disclaimer. We are not talking about um, party drugs.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly these things could be used at a party and could be used recreationally, and I have absolutely zero judgment on that. I have found personally for myself that that is not always it's not always been enjoyable for me used in that context. Every now and then I say, I've had situations where the plants themselves had said, no, 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 that's not for you. This is not how you work with me
Yes.
you know. So yeah, sometimes when people talk about set and setting, often your
Mm.
mindset as you go into this work and the setting that you're in And it makes a big difference. You could work with the same substance in two different settings and have a wildly different experience and have wildly different takeaways. So for me, when I am facilitating this work, I'm always holding it in more of a ceremonial or a therapeutic setting.
Yeah, because it does touch our unconscious mind.
Mhm.
So everything that we usually don't have access to.
Absolutely. That's one of the first things that I say when I sit down with people in the circle is that this work is going to make the unconscious conscious.
Mm.
It's going to bring things to the surface. In my experience, it usually doesn't bring things to the surface that we aren't ready on some level to see or to be with or to process. But it can be very confronting, and it can be very unsettling sometimes. So I have not enjoyed, using things in a recreational context or in big crowds because sometimes it does bring things up that have me just want to go sit, in an introspective space and be with myself or cry or, laugh hysterically and process things that for me feel very intimate,
Mm.
very vulnerable.
Yeah. And at the same time, sometimes, as you said, if we are not ready to process, then just nothing happens. I've experienced in the work that I did with sacred plants that one time there was just nothing, just
Mhm.
sitting there, totally conscious of everything that was happening. And then processing the fact of my expectations and unmet expectations and impatience, which is important work to do.
Right, an important lesson to
Yes.
learn, but not what one might expect.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I would be curious before diving deeper into the facilitative work you do and the division of tasks between you and the medicine and maybe the music and everything else that you bring into the space. What are, according to you, the biggest misconceptions?
Misconceptions in this work. Well, certainly there's the safety aspect. I think we're all familiar with just say no. You know, I certainly grew up in a in the dare era where officers were coming to school to tell us about the dangers of drugs and how it was going to fry your brain like the scrambled eggs in the commercial and that sort of thing. So I grew up even high school and even in college. I was very much like, oh no, 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 that's for
Mm,
bad people.
same.
Just a lot of judgment and a little like moral superiority around
Mm,
substances of any sort of consciousness altering substance. I had a little fear and judgment around. And I think that that's fairly common, especially generationally. So that's one. Um, and the other, of course, is sort of maybe on the opposite side of that is this feeling like these things are going to be our saviors and they are going to be a quick fix. I'm going to go in, I'm going to take this pill, I'm going to sit in a ceremony and I'll be healed. My work is done. I will be enlightened. Enlightenment in a day. Um, I think there are absolutely moments of velocity and enlightenment that occur in this work. But maybe there's also the misconception of what it looks like to sustain that.
mm,
I think often people maybe underestimate what integration actually looks like and how much support can be needed before and after an experience to get the level of transformation that they might want.
mm. And when you speak of integration, what do you mean by that?
Great question. Integration can mean and can look like different things for different people, and everybody's process, of course, is going to be unique. The first thing that I think of when I say the word integration is, well, the somatic work to hold it in the body, but also being able to talk through it with somebody who has been there and who is trained or well versed in being able to talk through, investigate, explore, discern some of the learnings from these, these experiences and from these medicines, and to look at what are the changes that you are asking of yourself. What are the changes that your depth is asking of you to come into deeper authenticity and connection with yourself?
Mm.
So for me, that often looks like integration coaching work with people, or sometimes I'll refer people out to work with a somatic therapist, perhaps, because this work also is very often waking us back up to the mind-body connection in a way that we've lost especially in our fast-paced society. I get so in my mind in the day-to-day. I think a lot of us do. And so having an experience that opens us up to that heart connection or that spirit connection again. And then how do we integrate that back into our day-to-day lives? And that's often going to require some deep conversations and some powerful questions, and then also some practices.
Mm.
It's like building new habits. So
Yeah.
I often will suggest, of course, that people do things like journal, in the days after their experience. We have a few days where the window of neuroplasticity is very available. So to journal, to be mindful, to take life a little more slowly for a little while and start to build trust with that slowness.
Mm.
Something that was said recently, I think my partner actually said it. I'm not going to claim that the line came from me, but he said, let's see what it feels like to move at the pace of presence.
Mm. Oh, I love
And
that.
yeah, I loved that so much. And so for me, that statement alone can be what integration means.
Yeah. Yeah, because we wake up with this enlightenment, if we're lucky, insights that our unconscious has told us or brought to us. And then it's so easy to forget about that or to lose the trust, the confidence, or not seeing how to actually implement it. And then before we know it, we're back in our old routine.
Absolutely. And the mind likes the familiar, the brain likes the
Mm.
familiar. We have our comfort zones, and this work is going to expand the comfort zone and expand consciousness. And with any expansion, I think comes a little contraction.
Mm.
So I also sort of give people the heads up that integration may look like expand, contract, expand, contract, expand, contract. And that circle of expansion is gradually going to get larger and larger and larger if you are engaged in proper integration work, if you are allowing yourself to breathe with that and
Yeah.
expand over and over again. But yeah, I think it's very predictable and common to get pulled back into our old routine ways of doing things.
Yeah. And it's the same thing with any workshop we do. We create a more or less artificial environment that is safe to experience something that is out of our day-to-day life. And if we don't integrate, if we don't actually process what has happened at this workshop, we go back to work on Monday morning and everything is just the same. And this
Absolutely.
behavioral change just needs time, um,
Yes.
and
And
attention.
it starts to, I think it almost starts to feel like it was a dream.
Yeah.
There can be that question, okay, wait, what? I just experienced a completely different reality, a completely different understanding of reality. But here I am back at my desk at work on Monday. What's real?
Mm.
And that's a beautiful, profound moment of getting to recreate reality a little bit and integrate what I saw in this realm and what's available to me here, not necessarily, especially at first, in terms of what we see out in the world in front of us, but who we are on the inside and how we're showing up.
Yeah, and
And
trusting this inner self,
mhm.
being more
And it
vulnerable than.
takes, yeah, that vulnerability, I think it takes so much courage.
Mm.
The journey experience, can help us remove all of this armor, all of these defense mechanisms, all of the masks that we've been wearing for years and years. A question I asked one of my groups recently was, what's it like to be who I am if I'm not trying to be anyone?
Mm, scary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I guess scary question for many because we are so used to wearing all the masks and all the armor because our vulnerability has been punished over years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's pain there, there's fear there. And of course, there's also joy and bliss
Mm,
and
yeah.
delight there, and I think the psychedelic experience, especially in community, is such an opportunity for healing around that, to find that it is safe again to take that armor off and to be seen and to be felt and to have that deeper connection with each other, you know.
Yeah. And what I found remarkable is that it's like a shortcut. So you can get into similar spaces with your mind and your heart through breathing
Mhm.
exercises, through fasting. I did 10 days fast, so 10 days 0 calorie fast,
Wow.
and got into places that I didn't believe could just appear like that out of nothing. So
Mhm.
really sober.
Yes, meditation, mu-
Meditation, yes.
music,
Yeah.
music can transport us. And
Mantra singing, I heard that can
oh,
also get people to very ecstatic places, ecstatic dancing.
static dance, shamanic drumming, there are
Yes.
all these things that really can create a psychedelic experience,
Yeah.
some sort
Which,
of consciousness altering moment. Mhm.
exactly. Which for me shows that it's really an expansion of our mind and we can access um, opportunities, possibilities, capacities that otherwise are not available to us because we are putting all these masks on. And I think, especially for when we're working in these highly competitive environments where we're so used to self discipline and covering our vulnerability, then
Mhm.
this shortcut might actually be very helpful because we
Absolutely.
don't have to sit and meditate for 10 days.
Right.
We can
Right.
participate in a ceremony.
Yes. And eventually, even if, when people start to come in to ingest some of these substances, we say the goal is not that you now need to do this forever and ever. It's a process of remembering.
Mm, yeah.
It's a process of remembering who I am, what I'm capable of, what is innate within me. And yes, some of these psychedelics and these plants might help me remember, but they aren't creating it. They aren't putting something in me that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
They are amplifying, I think, especially amplifying our innate capacity to love.
Mm, yes.
And that's where the miracles happen. That's where the healing happens.
Yeah. So I would be curious where you learned that, how to facilitate, how to apply, and which medicine substance to use for what occasion. So if someone comes to you and you're a trained coach, so when someone comes to you with different challenges, issues, questions, how do you know what to do with them? That sounds so wrong. How to guide
No,
them?
no.
How to guide them?
Let me take one moment. My husband apparently has decided to take a phone call right beside my office. He knows that I am recording with you. Let me just go ask him to move real fast. I'm so
Yes, no
sorry.
problem.
The best seat in our entire house is by our fireplace and two very cozy chairs, and that is where he is parked at the moment. And I was like, can you just maybe shift for the next hour or so? Okay, so where we got to was around training, facilitation,
So
where I'm learning.
where did you learn that?
Choose. Yeah.
And how do you know how to serve your clients?
Ooh, yeah. This question especially feels vulnerable because I imagine that there are going to be other facilitators who hear and listen to this who might have a completely different experience or a completely different opinion of what medicine should be used when or what supplement should be used when. So I'll say in this work, I think there is always a mix of training and intuition
Mm,
and always a partnership with each client. Each person I'm working with may need something slightly different. And there are so many factors that go into it as well in terms of that person's physical health, emotional health, spiritual health. There's the factor of do they have any health conditions that might preclude them from working with certain things? Or are they on other medications that might be contraindicated or that might interact in a way that is not going to get us where we want to, where we want to go or not create the experience that we want? Um, I will say for myself, I can certainly speak to that, to my own experience. I have found for example, I really love working with psilocybin for creativity and for presence. I have an ADD diagnosis from about 24 years ago, and I was on Adderall for a very long time. And I found a few years ago that an LSD microdose actually gave me the same focus an ability to do tedious tasks as the Adderall did, but without some of the overstimulation in my body, and without totally taking my appetite away, some things like that, some of the side effects I was experiencing from the
mm,
Adderall. I found that an LSD microdose was giving me the benefits without some of the drawbacks.
mm,
So there's an example like that. Um, Based on research as well, psilocybin can be great for depression and anxiety, as well as ketamine. Ketamine has been shown to work wonders on depression, treatment-resistant depression, or OCD, for
mm,
example. So if I encounter, someone who wants to work on some of those specific things, I'm going to take my understanding from my own personal experience, but also the research, the research and any previous experiences they've had. Sometimes people come in and they say, I had a really, horrible experience with psilocybin, for example. I've done some ketamine treatments and those worked really well, and here's why. So we're gonna take all of that into account to create, a protocol for each individual. And then also, as you referenced early in this conversation, there are locations where we can work with certain things and where we cannot, so sometimes it's also going to depend on where am I physically sitting with this person? Where in the world are we and what's available here
mm.
that's legal and ethical for them to work with,
Yeah.
you know?
Where did you learn to use the plant medicine? Where did you use the shamanic work? And to what extent is the shamanic work different from the psychedelic work?
Ooh, let's see. How would shamanic work different than the psychedelic work? That one also feels like even the way that question is phrased, I'm thinking about how could I get in trouble for the way that I answered that question? I'm so mindful. We were going to cut this part too for a second. I'm so mindful. It's funny. I'm in a big chat with a bunch of other facilitators,
Mhm,
and it is so interesting. People are incredibly sensitive around the languaging and how we talk about these things. And so I'm just noticing every now and then before I answer something, I have 600 voices in my head of how is that person going to receive how I answer this question, or how I think about this question. So, all right, let me back up.
But
Let it.
two questions or offers. we could just also go into a different direction, or maybe do this again another time to really speak about the facilitative work and keep all the to keep it more in the dark of what we're actually talking about. And then it would rather be about how to create the psychological safety and hold the space and do the experience.
Mm-hmm.
Could be
I
one
think
way.
I can speak a little bit to having had shamanic training, clinical training, and personal experience. Um, I won't specifically say where any of those trainings have
Of
come
course not.
from.
Of course not.
Yeah, but but yeah, we can
Yeah.
talk about um the blend of training that I bring.
If that's
Yeah.
good for you. Otherwise, I'm also happy
Yeah.
to say, okay, maybe we went too deep into the details because I'm curious, and then we can also take a different direction.
Okay. Let's see where that takes us. All right.
To ask the question again.
So thinking about the different blends of training and experience that I bring to the table in these settings. I have engaged in some shamanic training. I have been able to experience some clinical training. And I think very important in the psychedelic and the plant work is that I also come from personal experience with the medicines and the substances. And this is a big conversation in this facilitation world right now, is that there are clinical trainings happening with people who've never had a psychedelic experience, you know, and
Mm.
as we look at how the landscape might shift over the years to come, with different legalization conversations on the table. And I don't necessarily want to go too far into this, but there's always a conversation around, how do we find the balance between wanting people to be trained and to know how to create safe spaces, medically and psychologically. But we also, I mean, I know for me, I want to work with somebody who has traveled those realms and has done deep work with the medicine. I want to work with somebody who's had dozens of experiences and has encountered their own turbulent and challenging journeys, and who has, crawled through the depths of their own soul, not just they've read some studies and read a textbook on it, and maybe they have medical training, but they haven't experienced
Mm.
their own sort of shamanic initiations, so
Yeah.
to speak,
Yeah, this resonates so much. I'm thinking of a guest, and I cite her so often, Juanita Robinson, who said, you cannot guide people to places where you haven't been yourself.
Absolutely.
And I think, especially with the work that you're doing and that we talk about, is this given that no experience is alike, and you might have a group of individuals you work with where every individual experience is different. How to hold space for that if you don't know what it might actually be happening for them. And also, I think there's another part when I speak about the work of a facilitator, and I find it very interesting that we speak about facilitators and have very different concepts actually in what context we're facilitating. So when I facilitate, these are talk shops. We talk, maybe we draw, but it's usually very corporate. And still, I think to be a good facilitator, we have to be have done the inner work.
Absolutely.
So, what are facing our demons, our triggers? Where are we coming from so that we can really hold space for the group? And I imagine that is, no, I know for sure that this is even more important for the facilitation work you do.
Absolutely. Energy begets energy. And whatever we bring into the space in our being as facilitators, I think it shows up in some way in the group, in the participants, you know? So being mindful, I think it's so important to do some sort of mental and or energetic clearing for
Mm.
me as a facilitator before I walk into a space or before I turn on the Zoom. If I'm facilitating just a corporate workshop, for
Mhm.
example, 'cause I also do work that doesn't involve, the psychedelics and the plants. Although I tell people, even if you didn't ingest it, you may now be working with it through me because it's alive in me. I am bringing that work into every space that I walk into. But I am also experiencing, the more I do of it, really recognizing how important it is not just to be mindful of what I'm bringing into the space, but who else am I bringing in on my support team,
Mm.
you know, and recognizing whatever breakthroughs that any of us might be up to in our own life, we are now bringing that into the space for our participants as well. Everybody, it's like a hall of mirrors, of course.
Yeah, and the amplification of all of that is our insecurities will spark insecurity in the participants.
Mhm.
And I can imagine that so from in my experience in the talk shops, talk facilitation is I need to trust the process so that the group can trust the process. Can you walk me through your process work? So how do you onboard? How do you create the safe space so that everyone can really focus on their inner work?
Mhm.
And what is the role of the facilitators, you, the support team?
Yeah. Yes, I think the process begins for me before I ever even meet a person who might be coming in, you know, because I also recognize for myself that whatever I've been processing as a person, every time I have my own personal breakthrough, or every time I maybe connect more deeply with a certain aspect of myself, or I clear something from my own path, I release something, I let something go, there will be a potential participant who shows up who wants to work on that exact thing.
Mm,
It never fails. And that shows up in my coaching practice as well, that my clients will often be working through something. The content may be a little bit different, but contextually, like, oh, okay, I see you. I see you. I can walk with you in this. And of course, I'm not going to tell them what to do or give them advice. That's not my job, but I will ask some questions that come from the new access I have to my own depth as the result of the work I've done to clear something,
mm.
you know. So I find that that makes a difference with who starts to show up in my field and who starts to get curious about this work.
One quick question, just to clarify. I hear you using the word something you have cleared from your
Mhm.
past.
Mhm.
Would you use it as a synonym to healing, or what is the difference?
Great question. I think yes, there's healing, and to even speak a little more to what that means to me, I am clearing some of the emotional ties to a particular event.
Mm,
I can acknowledge that this event happened, but when I think about it, it no longer has the level of emotional impact
hmm
that it used to, that it once did. And maybe it also no longer informs how I interact with others or how I see the world or how I see myself. So my vision is clear,
hmm
you know,
Mm, okay,
from the lens that experience used to put in front of me. I've actually cleared that and I can see it for what it is.
that makes sense. And is this then different from healing? Because for me, healing is almost similar. It's a wound that no longer itches and hurts.
I think, if healing is returning to wholeness,
Mm,
that analogy is great. Perhaps there was a wound, there was a cut that was pretty deep. And as I've healed it, I have remembered my own wholeness. that cut no longer stings, that no longer feels like a bruise when that information touches me
Mm,
again, or when I touch that information. Yeah,
thank you.
yeah. And I think sometimes as a facilitator, it can be beautiful when someone comes in with some wounds that maybe I'm still feeling a little bit in myself. I certainly have a deep level of empathy, but there's a fine line, I think, for me in having empathy for it versus still being so wounded in that spot myself that I can't take a step back.
Mm.
You
And then you
know,
would project, or it would trigger you,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and then you
And
cannot hold space. Hmm.
I have certainly gotten triggered in the space when facilitating. I've certainly had moments where I need to step out or bring in a co-facilitator or bring in some other support so that I can go clear myself in the moment. Um, yeah, that happens. And I think that is part of responsible facilitation in any setting, you
Yeah,
know.
to have that
Sometimes,
awareness. Mm.
yeah, that awareness. And I think, if it's not in the psychedelic space, if we're just working, let's say in a talking workshop, there might be times when I would want to name it and
Hmm.
ooh, I notice I've just gotten triggered by this thing. Let's maybe we shift this together. And sometimes there can be some amazing work in partnering in a vulnerable way like that with a participant versus in the psychedelic space. Often I really want to take myself and take my stuff out of the space while still being in relationship with that person. The relational work in psychedelic and plant work is I think vital.
Mm.
So finding, and this is sometimes for me just an intuitive process in the moment. What might this person need to hear about what's really going on for me right now? Or how can I speak to it in an honest way without projecting,
Hmm.
without putting something in their space that may just be more about me and my own process. I don't want it to be about my own healing process with it. I can take that away and get some support on that later. But in the moment, being able to connect, being able to understand and empathize can be exactly what's needed.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. Okay, so you're doing this prep. So before they even reach
Prep
out.
work. I was like, where did this begin? Yes. So prep work. So prepping myself, expecting, some of these things come in. The intake process is really important. The intake process, I have a form that people fill out that, and I let them know I need them to disclose very honestly and very thoroughly their mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health history, their current experience of those things, what's their support system like before and after their experience. I want to make sure that people aren't just leaving and going back into, a toxic setting or going to be alone and feeling isolated after a big experience. I want to make sure that they have a good system set up, and in some cases, I want to know that somebody has a therapist
Mm.
on hand, that they have somebody who they are regularly working with, who knows them and who can track the process with them. Um, Medications, we mentioned that there are in this work, there are medications that can, in some cases just keep a person from even feeling the experience,
Mm.
but in some cases could be quite risky, or even fatal. So that sort of stuff is not something to play with,
Yeah.
So that medical intake form is important. And confidentiality, that's huge
Mm.
in this work in both ways. I want to be very mindful of what's being shared out in the world about the work I do, and the people who come in to work with me want
Mhm.
to know that their process and their identity is safe,
Yeah.
be safely held, and we work with people who they're known out in the world. They
Mhm.
have a big impact. They are leaders, they are public figures out in the world. And it's very important to them that this be really sacred, that their personal process gets to be held as sacred and they get to do this work with the same privacy and protection as anyone else.
Yeah.
So that I think that goes a long way in creating safety. Um, and obviously I'm out in the world talking about this. I have a website. I'm talking to you on this podcast. I'm not in hiding about the fact that this is part of the work that I do, but I am also not going out into the world doing big marketing campaigns and saying, come one, come all, because I don't feel that way. It's very much a referral based,
Hmm.
you
Yeah.
know, I want to know that somebody coming in to my community, that somebody else in the community can vouch for them and say,
Hmm.
yes, I know this person. This is a person of integrity. This is a person who is really committed to doing their inner work. This is a person who's kind and compassionate and aware and conscious. So those things also help create some safety. I always have a phone or preferably a video call with people, just to get a feel for, does our energy seem to resonate? Is there a
Hmm.
resonance there? Am I the right person? Because that's
Hmm.
the other thing. I am not the right facilitator for every person, and I don't expect to be. There are people, maybe energetically or emotionally, it just doesn't quite feel like the right fit for whatever reason, or their case might be more complex than what I want to take on. Very honest with people. Yes, I am trained in psychedelic assisted therapy, but I am not a licensed therapist.
Hmm.
I don't want to pretend to be. So sometimes there are people who come in with such severe trauma that I recognize this is probably more than I want to or need to hold.
Yeah.
And I'm going to send them to another practitioner. And I think being honest about that with people also creates some safety because they recognize that I really care
Hmm.
about their experience and their safety. So I'm not just taking in, every single person. Um, what else? Talking about intention. That's important as well. The preparation to set an intention, to have a realistic intention, like we referenced earlier, wanting to make sure people aren't coming in with such high expectations that they're either going to be disappointed or feel like they did it wrong.
Mm. Oh
And
yeah.
that's a big one that comes up in ceremony a lot. This feeling like I'm not doing it right. Am I doing it right? I'm hearing this person over here have this big experience and I feel nothing. What's wrong with me?
Yeah.
You know? And often when that does show up, we get to sort of talk about, is that a thought that you actually have often? Like
Yeah.
it's not just what shows up in ceremony is something that's showing up in you. Like this is showing you your loop and your thought process that might be running in the background all the time.
Yeah. And the moment where you face it and you're confronted with it, then you can clear it.
Yes.
And I remember I
It.
had this experience that I thought I needed to work harder.
Mm.
I'm not doing it right. I need to work harder. I'm not allowed to fall asleep. I have to do this. I have to that. I have to focus until I realized, and this was this inner calling that no, I can just trust, relax, sit down, and trust the process. And then the most magical things happened. Um, and I realized that this is definitely a pattern in my work and life that I continuously try to work too hard and then self-sabotage for that instead of just, okay, trusting myself, trusting the process, and maybe taking it a little bit slower.
Trusting that it's okay to just be. It's okay to exist. I don't always have to be doing transformation. I don't always have to be doing to create the results. Sometimes I can actually manifest by envisioning and being and allowing. That this conversation, this is part of what I like to talk about with people in their intake, is a little bit about what do you know about some of your default thoughts and patterns?
Mm,
What do you already know about what you tell yourself about yourself on a normal basis so that if it does come up in the journey experience, we can say, hey, this is one of those things that you're looking to disrupt and to break up. Or I might even just sometimes mention, sometimes I will also ask people, if things get challenging, what's something you might want to hear or remember
mm,
to remind you that you're safe or to bring you back to your intention.
mm.
So
Yeah,
that's an important part of the preparation process.
yeah. And then in the ceremony, what
Mhm.
is a what is the process of basically? I assume that most of the groups are strangers to each other. So they don't know each other. They come together to do a very vulnerable thing.
Mhm. Yes, quite often it is a room full of strangers who, yes, become, friends and partners throughout the night, like they're really partnered in the work. But yes, a lot of times people come in complete strangers, or sometimes it's even maybe more intimidating when they walk into a room and you've got five people who've done this before in the
Mm,
same space with these same facilitators, and then two people who've never been here
mhm.
and they feel a little uncomfortable or a little lost. I will say, for us, I think we've done a really good job of cultivating a very welcoming, warm space and community. And what I notice is often as soon as people do walk in, their system is put at ease. I can actually see people's nervous system start to settle when they
And
walk in,
and
which
what
is nice.
are the nuances? What do you do? What happens as they walk in? What do they see or smell or what is
Yeah,
it?
yeah, I think we do our best to create a very warm, welcoming, homey atmosphere. And also, we have candles lit. We've just burned some sage. So there's some aromatherapy happening, and there's some energy that's been cleared in the space as well. Um, and I think also making sure as a facilitator, I'm always checking in on my own nervous system
Mm,
so that I can co-regulate as soon as people walk into the space. I am a safe, calm, welcoming space myself.
yeah.
And that makes a big difference. Offering, whether it's a hug or a handshake or just a nod of welcome, kind of gauging what is this person's comfort level with physical touch?
Mm,
What is their breathing like when they walk in? And I've had many beautiful experiences now in our space of seeing somebody walking up to the door, and I can already tell their eyes are wide, their breath is a little shallow, their body is a little tight, or maybe their body language looks pretty protective. And as soon as I greet them with a breath and a smile and an easiness and a non-attachment in my own space, that's the other thing, recognizing if this person needs to be a little nervous and anxious for a minute, that's okay. I don't need to fix this for them.
Oh yeah, I can see
It's
that.
like
Yeah.
really letting them have their pace and their process. And I typically witness that within, 30 to 60 seconds, I see the shoulders drop a little bit, see a little more space, see the breath start to calm. I see them look around, check out the space. Okay, these look like normal people. These look like people that I could just hang out with. All right, this feels better. And there's music playing, there's some nice, soft, sweet music playing, and I think that helps too. So yeah, all of those things coming together to
Mm,
set a welcoming. I am a person who loves to host things as well. Like
mhm,
I love to host a good party. It's one of my favorite activities, So when I am hosting, whether it's a retreat or a workshop or whatever it is, whatever physical space I am in my mind, I'm like, welcome home.
mm,
Welcome home. Welcome home to yourself and also welcome to my home. This is a safe, friendly, warm space. And I think people feel that.
mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I also, as things get rolling, I tell people put your stuff down, make yourself at home, find a spot that calls to you. So I'm not assigning spots of where people
Mm,
go. I let people kind of make their way around the space and feel into it. I think that helps as well. Occasionally, I'll be able to tell somebody needs to be told. They need a little direction.
mhm,
Being told to pick your spot might be a little overwhelming for them. So I might suggest this one over here would be a really nice one. This is a favorite spot. Why don't you try this one out? And that can be helpful to know, how much support somebody might need. And then, when we start to sit down, if people are new, I spend a little one-on-one time with them just to check in. How are you feeling today? Anything that's come up since our last conversation about this? I let people know we're going to start low and go slow. So whatever you ingest, I'm going to start pretty low so that we can see how does your body tolerate it? How does your nervous system tolerate it? How are you doing emotionally? And you're going to know I'm going to be there with you every step of the way. and tell people I can always give you more, but I can't take it out of you once it's in you. So we're going to start gentle,
Yeah.
you know? And that already puts people at ease as well, to know that I'm not just going to immediately try to shoot them to the moon and say, good luck, I'll be here when you get back. Like
Yeah.
we're going to do this in partnership with your system. We usually then, we'll sit down, we'll have everybody introduce themselves in a way that feels communal. You can just say your first name. You can share a little bit about how you're feeling in this moment if you want, and then we share intentions. And
Mm,
I'll always invite, somebody who has been with us before to start, so I'm not asking a new person to go first with the introductions. And what we see, and we, like I said, we've built a pretty good community. So there's almost always somebody in the space who's done it before. I think that also helps create safety. People see, okay, people are coming back. People are returning. This is a good sign, so that helps. And usually as people start to share intention, people are in their heart already, and I'll do some exercises to kind of help people drop out of the head and into the heart a little bit more. And we might do a little light movement or breath work to
mm.
get people into their body. So they're not just sitting and overthinking, what should my intention be? What's the right intention to set? Sometimes there's that pressure to get it right, to pick the perfect intention. So I'll always, share these things with people beforehand too. There's not a right or wrong intention. There's not a wrong way to do this.
Yeah, so what I hear is really every step of the process is focused on creating safety and calming down their nervous system and helping them to find trust in themselves.
Yes. Yes. And reminding them as well that their journey started when they said yes, you know, and that we say yes, and then life starts to happen and might throw some challenges at us and may throw some things at us that have us say, ooh, maybe it's not the right time. Maybe I shouldn't do this. And quite often, that is the grist for the mill. That's the perfect thing that needed to happen so that you could come in and actually work through what that drove up for you. So certainly the longer that I have been in this work, the more I have truly come to believe in divine timing, you
What do you
know,
mean by that?
just really deeply trusting synchronicities, trusting that whether we want to call it, orchestrated by spirit or just energy attracting energy, like attracting like, the moments where my mind or my ego gets attached and wants to push and move faster and faster. And I feel that tension, I feel
Mm,
the stress of that. And if I just let that go and allow, the perfect thing shows up at the perfect time, or I meet the exact person I need to help me get to that next step. And so I personally keep having these experiences of like, wow, it really feels like there is a greater love orchestrating
mm,
forward movement, in progress.
yeah. Yeah, it feels like the master shows up when the student is ready, always.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's
It's-
certainly been the case in my facilitation training as well. You know, I mean, this work came into my life after having my own personal experience with psychedelics, having a huge and a profoundly healing experience. And for years, just sort of letting it be my own experience. And then I had a client who also had a really beautiful experience, and we were integrating that. And he said, I think you might ought to look at facilitating this work.
mm,
Think this is a perfect match for you. And if he had not said that, if he had not had the experience he'd had, and then been working with me in an executive coaching capacity that turned into some integration work, and then introduced me to the people he introduced me to, who introduced me to the people I needed to know to do some training, like it just, every little breadcrumb, just
yeah,
trusting every little sign and guidepost along the way.
yeah,
Yeah, it really does. The teacher appears.
yeah. Because when it's so funny with the they, who is they? What I was told, my journey of personal growth, and it started with Vipassana. Vipassana, I did these 10 days silent meditation retreats. And at some point, you get a calling.
Mm.
And at some point, the calling is so loud that you know you have to go. I knew I had to go. It was first someone spoke about it, and then I heard it again. And then suddenly, as I became aware, I saw more and more signs. And I don't believe in the powers of the universe. I don't believe in God. I'm very pragmatic and
Mm.
um, ethi- an atheist. And still, I think when our mind is open to see these signs, we become aware,
Absolutely.
cannot unsee it anymore. And with Mama Ayahuasca, it's just the same thing. At some point,
Yeah.
it becomes a calling, and then she will give you what you need.
Yes. And I so appreciate that you bring in that perspective from, it doesn't necessarily mean there's a puppet master in the sky guiding all of our choices and decisions. I don't necessarily feel that way. But I love that, just that understanding that we set an intention or we suddenly notice we have a desire for something. And when our attention starts to focus on that desire or that vision, we notice things that we didn't notice before. And they show up. And if we can trust it, we can stay open and pay attention to it and then trust and move toward what we're drawn to, it works.
Yeah, yeah,
Things start to happen.
absolutely. And this, yeah, trust building capacity that already happens there, trusting our intuition and the calling and the process.
Mhm.
Part of the work.
Yeah.
And time is running. So I would be curious because there are these hypes going on. There was a hype where everyone started to call themselves a coach. I
Mhm.
now observe that everyone, air quotes, is calling themselves a facilitator. And now with psychedelics and plant medicine losing this negative connotation, oh, these are drugs, it's dangerous, but become more normalized, so to speak. I also see there are more facilitators, guides, coaches
Mhm.
who offer the work. And I wonder, how do you, what is the risk of actually working with someone who doesn't have the training or who didn't do the inner work? And how can we read the signposts?
Yes, this is such a big conversation. I would love to start answering that question by speaking to my own process with it a little bit. Even when I decided to become a coach, 2011 was the year I first heard about coaching. Somebody said, "Hey, you should talk to my life coach." And I said, that sounds like a made up job. I don't think so. I'm not interested. I was really kind of snooty about it, honestly. And it took me another year of watching that person's life get dramatically better while mine sort of stayed the same, dipped a little down into the rock bottom, and then came back. And I was like, okay, I'll try this coach. Let me just see what this is all about. And then when I realized through working with her that I felt very drawn to it, I second guessed myself for months and
Mm,
months. I did all of this research on programs. I talked to my own therapist about it. I talked to my friends. I talked to people who knew me well, many of whom, to be honest, were like, you are going to be a coach. You're going to help people decide what, are you sure? There's a lot of skepticism. I was an opera singer and I was very dramatic in my own life, and it was very interesting to feel that deep calling to something that made absolutely no sense for me.
mm.
None. This was not a predictable path for me to go down. I was living the wild, dramatic party girl life, and yet I could not turn away from it. And I do believe when your calling calls, it is not going to stop calling, you know?
I used to be an academic and turned into a facilitator.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And I think it's interesting to recognize sometimes the calling may come through a particular mechanism that isn't the end all be all mechanism, but it is a vehicle that is going to get you closer to making the impact that, that I'm meant to make, that I want to make, and being who I am truly meant to be. It's getting me
Mm.
closer to my authentic self and authentic expression. So all of that to say, when it came to the plants and to the psychedelics, the facilitation, I went through a similar process. I felt very drawn to it. I mean, it was like a tug in the center of my chest, my heart and my solar plexus. I could feel that energetic, ooh, something's like a magnet here.
Mm.
And my mind was like, that sounds crazy, you know? So for me, I am always interested in working with people who've had a similar experience where they didn't just hear, oh, that sounds like a good way to make money. Oh, that sounds cool. That sounds like a trendy new thing to do,
Mm.
And I thought, I mean, of course, those thoughts occurred to me too. Like, oh, okay, people are making money. I could make a living doing this. That sounds good. I would like to make a good living,
Mhm.
So I'm not gonna, pretend that that didn't factor into saying, okay, can I actually pull this? Is this actually a real career path?
Yeah.
Is this sustainable? Sure. But I think seeing that somebody is committed to it as a path, because I think coaching and facilitation, and especially in the psychedelic work, it's not just a vocation.
Mm.
It's not just a job. It really requires a different level of holistic commitment. It does require us to do our inner work in a way that, you know, not everyone has to do for the job that they do. There
Mm.
are jobs where you can show up, you can clock in, you can do a task and clock out, and then you're done, and you don't take that home with you. This work is 24/7 for me. This is all
Yeah.
the time. So I think knowing what someone's level is of commitment is to their own work is very important. If you're talking to a facilitator, if you're talking to a coach, I want to know, who is your coach? Who do you
Mhm.
work with? Who is your teacher? What retreats are you going on every year? When was the last time you sat in ceremony? And what are some of the breakthroughs that you've had? And I don't have a ton of people ask me those things, but when they do, I I am happy to answer those questions.
Mm.
And if I talk to somebody who's a little dodgy or who doesn't want to talk about their own process, or if they act like they don't need a process anymore, that's
Mm.
another red flag for me. If somebody's like, oh yeah, I did my work.
Oh,
I'm good.
ooh.
I don't need a coach anymore. I'm done. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
but you are holding space for other people. That's interesting, you know. So I think some of those things are important questions.
Yeah.
That, I will also say though, this work, like we've said, these are unregulated fields. There is not a certification that one can get in the psychedelic work at this point in time that suddenly makes everything okay in the eyes of every organization and every state and every government, every
Mm.
governing body. So there are some training programs that exist that I think advertise maybe certain things in a way that I don't know. I think advertising can sometimes be misleading. Same with coach trainings. There are coach trainings like you are suddenly going to make, X amount a month, and
Mm.
and they're really focused on the revenue and
Yeah.
the, what's in it for me. I think that's the best way to say it, because I'm not trying to knock any particular program or training path or anything like that. But I think you can also tell when somebody or when a training is focused on what's in it for me
Yeah.
versus how am I giving back? How do I get to contribute because of what I've learned? How am I partnering to make a difference in the world? Those are
Yeah.
different conversations.
Yeah. Thank you. This makes a lot of sense. And I think this applies, yeah, as you said, as much to the coaching world and to the facilitation world. If we stop participating, being facilitated, being coached,
Mhm.
we cannot continue to hold space because, yeah, we're never done doing the inner work unless we
Right.
become the Buddha. And then
And I think coaches, facilitators, plant medicine work, all of it, if people are not in it for the right reasons, if people's heart and soul is not also in the work, you don't last.
Yeah.
You know, it's not, I think also sometimes people come see one ceremony and think, oh, this looks cool. I want to do this. But what they don't see is everything that's happening in the background, the non-glamorous, cleaning and preparation and just the logistical aspects alone, you know? So I think checking in, I guess I'm starting to speak to, who is a person listening who might want to get into this work. I just tell people, like, just know that there's a lot that happens behind the scenes that's not fun, that's not sexy, that you don't get any glory for moving all the mats from the closet to the floor back and forth for hours, and like scrubbing the floors and chopping up the, food for prep and things like that. Like,
Cleaning the buckets.
yes, cleaning the buckets. Thank you. Exactly. Exactly. And
Yeah.
it just takes a lot of love, um, and a lot of humility.
Yeah. Yeah. What remains your facilitation challenge?
A great question. Oh, there are a couple that come to mind for me. The one that I am the most present to and constantly working on, and I've been working on it for years, shows up more in integration. And it is how I phrase things and offer feedback without it coming from needing to fix
Mm,
and not want to fix, even if it's just somebody's story. Like I don't hold judgment on the people in front of me, and it's not based on what I think they should do. But if I know that they're trying to break up a particular pattern or story, and then I hear them in it, I am
mm,
constantly working on how do I phrase this in a way that is more about connecting than correcting. How
mm,
do I connect them to the future they want to create instead of correcting the past and the present that they're in?
yeah.
And I just, I grew up in an environment that was pretty critical, so growth and lessons were always phrased through the lens of here's how you're messing it up. Here's how you
Mm,
are not doing it right. And so it's just that is such a habit for me in my own speaking.
Thank you for mentioning that. And
Yeah.
it reminds me of what you said earlier. Um, I I stored it in my memory as a kind of safety word. So when you have the intake, what are the phrases or the words that you can remind um, your participants of?
Mhm.
And I think that's a beautiful way to actually to have this agreement beforehand. Okay, if you're aware of your patterns, what can I say that makes it safe for you to receive it? Um, yeah.
Yeah, really trusting each person's own wisdom, that I don't always have to have the most profound question or the perfect reflection or the most enlightened thing to say, like really trying, because constantly getting our own ego out of the space and trusting I could say one word or maybe ask a question that sounds so simple. Um, I think, of course, in coaching, it's always helpful to remember that there are no stupid questions. That I can ask a question that my ego is like, oh, it's dumb. But for that person's wisdom, it's the simplest, easiest thing to let them speak to the profound answer.
Yeah. Yeah. And listening to you, it really sounds as if it's the facilitation work you do is kind of the pure form of the facilitation we do for corporate teams and workshops because it's all about this. We have to step out. It's not about us, it's about them. And we trust their inner wisdom. And they have to do the work and the process. Um, and then, yeah, in corporate workshops, there's all these words and all that stuff around it, but it really boils down to just that.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Learning, I think the plants and the psychedelics have taught me a lot about what it actually means to hold space.
Mm,
Can I hold the space without inserting myself into the space? You know, that's been that's been a deep learning because I have always felt the responsibility that this is to hold this space. I have always had a lot of reverence for the level of responsibility that I have said yes to.
Mm.
And in the beginning, that responsibility had me feel like I had to do the perfect thing and show up and be the perfect way. It put some pressure on myself to perform and get it right. And the more I've done it, the more I've been able to truly relax into trusting the process and trusting every person and every energy in the space. That I'm
Because it's
not
out
really,
of your hands totally.
absolutely, absolutely.
Mm. One question before the closing question. Do you also work with teams
I do. That
on
is,
also on the journeys, on the ceremonies?
yes, I am really passionate about this. That is, when we talk about energetic intelligence, leadership,
Hmm.
that is the vision that inspired really the whole company for me, doing executive coaching work and leadership work, and then seeing the difference that these ceremonies can make in team communication, in executive presence, in mindfulness, in truly feeling connected to an organization's vision and mission and values, and to have a completely new experience of embodying those things.
Mm.
Seeing what that brings to organizations, and then seeing what each of those people then take home to their families as well. It's it's mind blowing to me. Like I'm sure you can tell, like my energy is just like, yes, I'm such an ecstatic yes to this. And obviously, there are a lot of considerations.
Hmm.
Well, that this work is so intimate and vulnerable. And, the CEO might not want the person on this team that they don't know well to know some of the inner challenges that they're struggling with on a personal level. So it takes a lot of trust and a lot of intentionality to craft not only who gets to be in the room with whom, but also when are these people ready to do
Mm.
that? So
Yeah.
usually for us, it starts with working with, the executive to the C-suite team or co-founder team, you know. And then after some of that work and after some integration and after they do take it back in and they're taking the lessons they've learned back into different teams and
Mm.
what's the word I'm looking for, departments, then somebody will say, okay, I think, Joe in accounting is ready. I want to invite them in.
Yeah.
Uh, it often, at least at this point in time as well, it often has to be done more in a personal, it has to be set up as a personal, it's not like the company is going to
Yeah.
sponsor your team to come do this. That's just
Yeah.
not, we're not maybe ready for that just yet
Yeah.
with most organizations. I love working with startups because they kind of get to make their own rules,
Yeah.
so it's a lot more viable in that
Hmm.
world right now. So I
Yeah.
get really excited about that. But I certainly, have a vision of someday getting to work with, you know, I don't know, some Bank of America, bringing their team to do a retreat like this,
Yeah.
something like that. Um, but yes, I love that's one of my favorite things to do in this work.
Mm. Beautiful. Thank you. I'm glad that I asked.
Me
Uh,
too. Yeah.
Seeing possibility. What is the advice that you would have liked to you received early in your life when you got started?
Mm. There's one that has come in over and over the last few years, which is you're there. You're here. You've made it. You don't have to try, so you don't have to prove yourself anymore,
Mm.
you know? And that's something that I wish sometimes I could go back in time, 20, 30 years ago and tell my younger self, you don't have to prove yourself. Yes, hold yourself to a standard of excellence. Trust that your integrity matters and that it takes dedication and continued work and study. It doesn't mean you stop, but
Mm.
you aren't lacking in anything, is what I wish that I had heard more of. And when I did start to hear it, it really resonated. It took me a while to believe it, I've had to hear it from some of my own teachers and mentors. I have had to hear that over and over before it started to crack through the armor I'd built around my own fear of inadequacy and not enoughness.
Mm,
But that's been a big one.
mm. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is
Thank
such
you
a
for, yeah. Yeah, and for opening this other world of facilitation to me and to us.
Mhm.
It's been a
Yeah.
treat.
I feel like, we could talk about these things for hours and hours. So I'm always happy to answer questions and connect with people on this.
Thank you. And we'll
Go
put
deeper.
your contact and your homepage in the show notes so
Okay.
that the audience can reach out directly to you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. And thank you for being on the path yourself and
Thank you.
through bodying the medicine.
Such a gift.